Hello, my name is Rick Houston, and welcome to the Scene Vault Podcast, your source for all things NASCAR history. Presented by QWare. Maintain excellence.
Why are you in NASCAR? Why aren't you up at Indy with? And I said, there's a hell of a lot more chicken and beer to be sold than there is champagne and caviar.
The day NASCAR and all of us associated in any way with NASCAR forget its past, that's the day we don't have any future. All right, Bill, how did DiGard Racing get started?
It all started from a pinochle game. Mike DeProspero, the Di of DiGard, and with his wife and mine, we were playing pinochle, and he had made a lot of money in Connecticut and condo business, and he started spending his money in racing in Connecticut. And I had no idea about any of this and had not been involved in racing at all. And in the middle of this thing, he said to me, I'm going to enter a car in a Daytona 500. How about being my partner? And I said, well, he said, you know about Daytona? I said, yeah, I think so. I mean, I knew little other than the racetrack, Indianapolis, and there was a Daytona. Yeah. So he said to me, partner up with me. And I said, okay, I'll do it on one condition, that you do it first class and I don't get embarrassed. And we were both young guys that had, been fortunate to make some money. And so we went, I told him, go ahead and do it. Well, he had a car being built by Donnie Allison in Hueytown, Alabama. And he told me that. And I was taking off to the islands with the family. And I said to him, you got to get, the rest of the people in line. Well, when I came back, I said to him, I've read the NASCAR book. And I said, I've learned a lot now about the sport that you're trying to get me into. And, we need a crew, we need a crew chief. We need a lot of things. And I said, what have you done about it? He says, and how about a driver? And he said, I haven't gotten anybody. I said, you got to be kidding. So anyway, I said to him, okay, then let's you and I fly down to Hueytown and meet up with Bobby, who's building this car, which I have no idea anything about. And so we did. And Bobby introduced us to his brother, Donnie. And, we looked him up and felt that would be a good driver for us at the time. So we hired him, and then him and his brother helped put a team together, the pit crew. And so that's how that all started. Well, I had no idea that the car that he was having built was a Chevelle. And Bobby understood that he wanted this car to race in short tracks in Connecticut, in New England. So anyway, we show up to the Daytona 500, and make a long story short, we qualify the qualifying car, 44th or whatever it is at that time. And so you show up, you're at the end of the field, and if somebody falls out, you're in. Well, nobody fell out, and so that was my first experience of entering a car in NASCAR. So I was pretty perturbed and had a pretty severe conversation with Bobby. And I thought that Bobby, built us the wrong car. And come to find out, Bobby educates me and tells me that, no, you should have had a Monte Carlo to go through the air. He says, you got this big Chevelle, and you're lucky that you were for, alternate car. He said, and so I apologized to Bobby, because he knew I was mad. And so we went on, and I learned a lesson from that it's quite a complicated sport, and that there was a lot more to it. And so we ended up that year, my brother-in-law ends up crashing his Ferrari head on into a truck at 110, and ends up in the hospital almost dying and paralyzed in half his body. Make that a long story short, also, I was with his wife in the hospital, and helped with that situation. But I ended up where I ended up. If DiGard was going to continue, it was going to be by me only.
Right.
So I owned 100% of the team going forward into 1984, and my brother-in-law was incapacitated pretty bad, and that's when we entered the Daytona 500 in 1974, and almost won it. we had about 10 or 12 laps to go, and we're leading the race. And my wife and I were in the Goodyear suite, and I said to her, "Boy, this is easy. We're going to win this race." You know, and Bobby and Richard Petty was a half a track behind us. So I thought, you know, with that many laps left, we were going to have a victory, our first victory. Well, the guy driving 55 car blows his engine on the straightaway, and Donnie hits it and spins out. And make a long story short, he missed the entrance to pit road, had to hobble all the way around the track, and he ends up pulling into the pit. And we still could have come out in the same lap, and because there were only two cars, we would have been on his bumper. Well, I felt still pretty confident that we were going to have a shot to winning. In the meantime, the ABC Wide World of Sports is up in the tower looking for me to take me down to the winner's circle, which was kind of a bad situation. I wasn't too happy about that, but it happened. Well, the pit crew cuts the air hose going over the wall, and Donnie goes down a lap. So that was my introduction to the sport. And I was so mad, you know, and convinced that, you know, I could do something and enjoy this thing if I got more involved.
Yeah.
And so I did. It kind of got me hooked. And so from there, you know, we moved the team that was working out of a garage in Hueytown, Alabama. I bought a facility in Daytona, a big facility, which at the time was state of the art. Built a home, you know, the engine room for Robert Yates and everything else, and had the place spick and span and ready to roll. And I thought that the center of racing was Daytona. Well, after a few months, we couldn't get anybody to come to work. and they called me down for a meeting, and so they convinced me that we needed to move to Charlotte area. And
Right.
So I said, fine. So we bought a facility up in Charlotte, moved the team, and then I just sold the building. And that's how we ended up in Charlotte, and ended up with Yates and the rest. I mean, obviously having Robert was huge. And in fact, we had a separate operation. As you probably know, we had more than half the field with engines that were our engines that nobody even knew about. But that's a whole nother story.
What was your business background before you got into NASCAR?
Oh, I was in the steel business, stainless steel business.
Yeah. I didn't know that.
In strip and stainless steel wire. I had facilities in various locations in the United States, and then I was also heavily involved in real estate, big time. And because we could shelter our income from the steel businesses by you know, the depreciation factors that the IRS allowed under those laws. So I ended up building quite a few facilities in an industrial park and you name it. And so that expanded into that, and it just became one thing after another. So my career was in all different directions.
Right.
And that's where my money came from. And then subsequently, I opened up a bank the first bank in Connecticut, which I was underwritten by two underwriters, which had never been done. I was chairman of the board of that bank for 5 years. I wasn't a banker. I was the businessman sitting on the board. You know, those kind of things. And we had shopping malls in Clearwater, Florida, and we owned the Diamond and Jewelry Centers in Miami, several facilities and huge buildings down there. A large real estate portfolio with my partners. I had different partners in different segments of my career.
Mm.
And so then racing came along, and you know, I mean, I got, obviously I liked it and got more and more involved, and I was convinced that my team could break into the big three, because everything at that time was won by Pearson, Petty, and Yarborough.
Yeah.
And so I had to break into the big three, and that was my goal, which I did. And ultimately, as we progressed, we ended up with just Junior and DiGard being key teams for several years during that period. And then, of course, I changed drivers with Donnie. Quite frankly, I'd found out that Donnie's a terrific guy and a hell of a racer, but he was really excellent in super speedways. But I had heard that he had problems with being in crashes and short tracks, and was concerned that I was never going to be able to win a championship if I couldn't win short tracks. So when we didn't do well at that 4th of July race, I terminated our relationship, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And at the time, I had come down to Daytona in our yacht, and so I had my wife and I had quite a bit of time to think about it on our way back to Connecticut. But it was a strange thing that happened was that my brother, I had bought a Donzi down in Florida. My brother was hauling it back up to Connecticut, and it stopped for gas, and who pulls behind them but Darrell Waltrip. I mean, fortuitous, you couldn't believe. So they start talking, and of course, we don't have a driver. And so they talked on that time, and then they got back on the highway. And wouldn't you know, my brother stops at a gas station again. I mean, and who pulls in behind them? And they weren't on the highway together. So this was really strange. My brother, and he says to me, "You won't believe who's behind, you know." So he says, "It's Darrell." So they talked more. Well, that led to my brother telling me something's leading us to this Darrell Waltrip deal. In the meantime, him and his father-in-law flew up to Connecticut. His father-in-law was a hell of a nice guy, chairman of a very large company, and we met, and he convinced me to give his son-in-law the ride, and that started that. And from that, his president, he was chairman of this company. I think it's Texas Gas Transmission or something. In either event, he made the introduction, and I flew out with Darrell to meet with Bill Stokely at Stokely Van Camp, who owned Gatorade at the time. And what happened was that they made the introduction, and I sat there with Bill Stokely, who was the same age as me, and chairman, and obviously the largest stockholder and everything. And we cut a deal, and I cut a very unique deal with him, and because he was a little leery. You know, the only kind of people that were in the sport were the three major automotive companies, and there wasn't anybody that was in the other industries. So I made a deal with him that he couldn't lose, that he only paid me for first, seconds, and thirds, and he paid me for laps led. And, you know, my background was contracts. And so I drafted the contract and said, "Look, you got nothing to lose. I'm paying the bills anyway, whether I have you on the car or not." And so we made a deal. We signed a contract, and Bill and I became best friends. And his sales the first year, he wasn't supposed to tell me, but he told me it went up like 300%, Gatorade product. And they couldn't believe the impact that NASCAR had. And you know, my theory was even with Bill Sr. and Bill Jr., was the conversations that we had. They were shocked when I asked them for a copy of their insurance policies. They wanted to know, no one else had ever asked for that. And I said, "Well, if my cars go into your stadium, I'm going to get sued along with you." And they said, "Well, we never thought of that." And that's the difference between a business guy with all kinds of background in litigation and everything else that they were shocked at, and they did, and we learned from that. I wrote the first written contract in auto racing, which was Darrell Waltrip's contract, to the best of my knowledge. Roger Penske had heard about it, and Roger asked me to meet with him, and I did, and we became very good friends. And I said, "No, look, I'll share with you my contract that I wrote for Darrell," and he was very interested in getting his hands on it. And I said, "But you know, you had lost Donahue over in Europe, and I'd like to see, you know, the lawsuits and the litigation aspects and your backups to how you're going to defend this thing." I said, "Because it could end up with me." So we started a mutual relationship, Roger and I, that we felt was both beneficial from looking at the business of racing as a business and not just a sport that people didn't get it. I mean, I was I think I was way ahead of my time. That's the problem. But
how did you see DiGard? Did you see it as a business investment, or was it more of a hobby or a distraction from your other business ventures? It sounds like you were very business oriented, even when it came to DiGard.
well, absolutely. I employed my business skills because I saw the sport going huge. I was sitting in my jet with my wife, and Bill Sr. and Jr. stuck their head in one day and said to me, what are you doing in the sport? Why are you in NASCAR? Why aren't you up at Indy with, instead of here? And I said, there's a hell of a lot more chicken and beer to be sold than there is champagne and caviar. And I said, well, you guys own this thing that's huge, but the potentiality of it is it's much larger than I even think you think it is. And I said, and that's the reason that sponsors will want to come into the sport, provided you do it business-wise. I mean, not having a contract with a driver and having moral turpitude clauses and things like that, I mean, they had never heard of anything like that. And that's what I employed into the sport business.
Now, your brother Jim was team president. What was the working relationship between the two of you? As a team owner, I would assume that you had the final say on whatever was going to go on at the moment.
That's true, but my brother was a blue collar worker, and really fit extremely well in managing the employees, the team members. He knew how. At every Monday morning, he sat down with every team member in his office and went through with them and their problems and the issues that they have with their wives, if they didn't get a jacket and someone else got a jacket, and the little things. But those little things can be big things. And so he was very, very good at dealing with the employees and managing the thing day to day. And my skill sets were the legal and financial aspects of the business. And so between the two of us, we made a good pair. I was up in the suites. I mean, I was the first probably spotter in NASCAR, because my wife and I would be in a suite, France suite or Union Oil, and I'd have a headset on that could talk to the driver and the crew chief. And so that actually was something that was very good also. But my brother was in the pits with the guys, and that whole situation worked out well between us.
Well, you've already told us how you met up with Bobby and Donnie in Hueytown. And Donnie was hired as your driver. What was your relationship with him? I mean, there were apparently, as you sort of voiced, apparently some ups and downs about what you thought of competition.
Well, Mike, I went into the sport, and the more I got into it, I mean, I went in to try to win a championship. And of course, to win a championship today, it was different back then. You couldn't fall out and then come back. You really had to have a car that lasted the entire race, or you lose the points and you're nowhere. Totally different than today. And what I wanted to do was to find a driver that I believed could win the championship. And I mean, Cale Yarborough came up to me when he was leaving junior and talked to me about driving. Unfortunately, he only wanted to drive limited races, and that wasn't my take. And I he was obviously a fabulous driver. And so with Donnie, the concerns that I had, with him from a physical standpoint and stamina was, God bless him, and he's a heck of a race driver. He's won a lot of races, but most of the races that he was really tops with were super speedway races. And you can't win a championship if you can't win, at that time, North Wilkesboro and Martinsville and everything else. Yeah. And if you have injuries from the past, they can take their effect in 500 laps at Martinsville. And so that was the main reason that I felt that I needed to have a different driver if I were going to win a championship.
All right, you moved from Daytona to Charlotte, as you explained. How much of a benefit did that really prove to be for you?
was the whole deal.
Yeah.
That was the whole deal because there were plenty of first-class mechanics in Charlotte,
Yeah.
and Robert knew them all, and so it enabled us to hire all kinds of people, but whatever we wanted. So without that, it was definitely a problem being in Daytona. It was
Right.
what I saw was not correct, and I corrected it, and to this day, all of them, 99% of the race teams are in Charlotte.
Mr. Gardner, one of the first lessons that you learn as a journalist, or at least you should learn as a journalist, is that there are two sides to every story. And we did talk to Donnie for the podcast a few months ago, and he said that when he left the team, DiGard, that he received $500 for his stock in the company that he had received in exchange for a car or two and a truck and various pieces of equipment. That was his side of the story. What's your side of the story?
Well, whatever the transactions were at the time, it was a long time ago. I mean, we had a contractual agreement because obviously that was my life. I mean, he was under contract, and whatever the contracts read, I honored them and terminated his services. If he was unhappy because he didn't get $1 million or whatever, I mean, the contract read the contract. And if he wasn't happy then with the fairness of that, he shouldn't have executed A, number one. Number two, or brought suit against me for doing something wrong that I did. I didn't do anything wrong. I honored my agreements and whatever he has to say. I mean, I'm not, at this point of life, I'm not interested in throwing stones at Donnie. He's a heck of a nice guy. He's got a beautiful family and everything else. But it just wasn't a fit for DiGard and him. And everybody has however they feel about how you break up a relationship.
Right.
I mean, I had that same problem with Darrell. When
Right.
Darrell tried to walk out of his contract, he didn't realize that he couldn't walk out of the contract. And I said to him, I said, Darrell, the reason we have these contracts, and by the way, we kept renegotiating all the time, and I'd give him various things that he wanted or whatever, make him happy, and that stays on the records because it shows how many times he pulled all these deals. And then ultimately he wanted to go to junior. And the big thing that happened with him was that, and later it got resolved between he and I, was, I told him, I said, look, you just can't walk away from a contract. I was the first one to write a contract. And the reasons behind that were, Stokely Van Camp, et cetera, and any other, not Union Oil, the oil company. He didn't understand it, that they had gone out and produced TV slots for next year, that Stokely did all this work, that they expected to have their driver, Darrell Waltrip, in the car. And he couldn't just walk away. And so I held him to the contract, and we went through all the rigmaroles, and I never really said anything because I knew at the end of the day, I would prevail. And it's exactly what happened. And so I said to him, we came up with a number, and really what I was doing was reimbursing Stokely Van Camp for all their expenses. I didn't make any money out of the deal. But in subsequent years have passed, and Darrell and I have become friends again, and he even said to me, Bill, you were right, I was wrong, which was nice between the two of us. And he said, I've learned about contracts, and I've learned about a lot of things. I said, well, you were a racer, and I was a businessman, and I didn't want to hurt you in any way. I could have sat him down, which he finally found out, with no income for years. But that wasn't what I was looking for. I just wanted to make sure there was a clean cut exit where our sponsor didn't get hurt. So that's what was behind that.
Yeah. Well, you finally got your first win at Richmond in September.
Yes.
Yeah. What did that mean to you personally?
Wow, big, huge. I can't tell you how huge. I mean, it's just, and the problem was, the biggest thing, I wasn't there. And it was a phone call to me. For some reason, I had a business commitment
Oh,
somewhere.
really? I didn't know that.
No, I wasn't there to see it. And it was
Oh.
a great, got the call and everything. It had to be a business, pretty serious business commitment that I was in for me to not go to the race, because my wife and I traveled to every race.
Mr. Gardner, from 1976 to 1977, there was a huge turnaround in results on the racetrack. Darrell won 6 races and was 4th in the Winston Cup standings at the end of the year. How were you able to accomplish such a dramatic turnaround from
all
one
about
year to
people.
the next?
Racing is about people, and all businesses are really, but especially in a sport that's like NASCAR is. And if you have the talent, and especially with the changes and the new innovations that we brought into the sport. I mean, Gary Nelson got, for instance, power steering to work. They had tried it for years. Nobody ever was able to get it to work. Well, he did, and we had it. We had a deal with General Motors that if we had things that we developed, that we would have exclusivity on the conversations relative to that for 3 races before the data got out to someone else. And so, for instance, with the power steering, we also were innovative with respect to shock absorbers, things that made the car race faster. We also had, because I was from the steel industry, they used to put lead in the rails to meet the weight restrictions, the sanctioning body. Well, I had introduced to my team a word called tungsten, and they had never heard of tungsten. And tungsten is a metal that is incredible, small in quantity and heavy in weight. And I had some shipped down to Gary, who couldn't believe it. And that actually helped us with the balancing of the car and where we put the weights and things like that. So it's all technological improvements that we would come up with, and eventually the word would get out and other people would have it. Today, everybody's got it in their shops.